Dbsb here, and I'm going through some of my boxes as I'm unpacking in my new place, and I found some writing that I did in a creative writing course that I did a while back. I did a reading of one, and this is another exercise where we've got the story written in first person and third person, the same story. I haven't read them through. I vaguely remember what the story is, so I'm just going to read them and then save it for prosperity and stuff like that. Okay. I remember the what do you call it? The theme of the project was the main protagonist had to tell someone they loved them. Everybody knows that preparation is the way to a woman's heart. So I check the packet in my backpack one last time before leaving on this most important mission. Of course, normally I complete my missions for shady government departments, but this mission is personal. I slip silently from my apartment into the autumn evening. I blend in with the crowds on the street and slide into a queue for the bus. The bus eventually pulls up and gushes open. I pull out my money like a ninja drawing his shuriken. The driver is lucky to have plexiglass between us. "What are you doing, mate?" The driver asks. I'll have a saver." "No, make it a single." I answer with confidence. If this mission goes to plan, I will not need a saver ticket. I sit on the top deck of the bus and watch as the stops slide by. As the stops slide by, my heart rate slowly raises and a cold sweat builds. I decide to get off a few stops early so I can let the cool air of the evening focus my mind. I sit in the bus stop for a moment to let the nerves for this mission slow down. I need my full attention if I'm going to complete this mission. I shut my eyes and put my head into my hands and practice breathing techniques that the fighting Shaolin monks use. My concentration is broken by the strong, musty smell of urine, or at least stronger than a bus shelter normally smells. Sitting next to me is what looks and smells like a transient man. His cracked, gruff voice splutters into action. "Oi, Andy, got any shoes for me?" Of course, a deep undercover agent looking for dead letter drops. My reputation precedes me. These guys were a breed apart. Normally they went mad wandering about looking for dead letter drops. I've got a different skill to those guys. That is not life for me. I answered, "Leave it out, mate. I'm off duty." Hopefully that was enough of an answer. The hand-to-hand combat skills of these guys is well known. Luckily, it was enough of an answer, and he went off into the night. With my mind cleared and ready for the mission, I slip out of the shelter. I stick to the shadow of the hedge and work my way to the prime destination. Each step nearer appears to be making the mission seem more and more difficult. All of a sudden, I'm at the gate to the house, an ordinary house, but for some reason, it looks like a huge, looming, enormous castle that would be inhabited by some uber Bond villain. But I'm here now. I slip the backpack from my shoulders, open it, and pull out a box of chocolates. All my confidence building visualization of me being a super spy is crumbling away now. Now that I'm at the difficult bit, I'm walking up the path to the door, but all I keep thinking is, I'm Andy. I'm just the guy who cleans bus shelters. I lift a heavy arm and press the doorbell. No, I can't do this. I feel sick. I drop the chocolate box on the door and run. Before I can hear the doorbell ring, I run down the path and dive into a nearby bush. From the bush, I can see the light come on in the hall and the feminine silhouette appears at the glass door. The door swings open and I see her looking like an angel with a halo of light from the hall behind her, around her head. She steps out the doorway and treads on the chocolates I left for her. Would you kids just piss off? She shouts into the night. From my bush hideout, I whisper under my breath, I love you. I was one step closer, one step at a time. Andy was the guy who cleaned the bus shelters. After a long day of removing lone shoes from the top of bus shelters, he sat in his bedsit staring into a backpack. He did not normally do this. Normally he would sit in his bedsit staring at a television, playing a PlayStation game. Something with ninjas or spies, games of skill and cunning. He could complete Shinobi 4 without having to kill anyone. He was no hack and slash button basher. In the PlayStation world, he was all about stealth and style. But it was a different matter in the real world. Andy gets up, pats his pockets down to check he has keys. He's always locking himself out. So it's always a good idea to check. As he leaves the room, he realises that the light has blown in the hall and walks into the wall several times before falling out of the main doorway into the drizzly grey evening. Shoppers and commuters ignore each other and Andy as he walks to the bus stop. The bus pulls up and a stream of people pour out, knocking Andy side to side. When Andy eventually gets to the driver, he pushes his hand into his pocket and pulls it out, spilling the contents onto the floor. While Andy is scrabbling about on the floor, picking up loose change, the driver shouts through the plexiglass, "What are you doing, mate?" While trying to piece together the right money, Andy mumbles, "I'll have a saver." No, make it a single. He was sure he had another pound coin. But Andy is still feeling a bit flustered from dropping all his change in front of the driver. He goes to sit down on the top deck so he can watch the shelter tops, so he can see where the shoes have reappeared, in an attempt to try and stop him thinking too much about what he was going to do. It was not working, so he got off a few stops early. He stepped off the bus, looking pale and clammy. He slumped down at the bus stop, looking like he was going to cry. At that moment, Benny, an unfeasibly untidy and smelly tramp, shambles into the bus shelter. He slumps down next to Andy and shouts, "Oi! Got any shoes for me?" Andy looks up startled to see Benny. He knew Benny from cleaning the bus shelters. Sometimes Benny would follow the van from shelter to shelter, hassling Andy to give him the old loaned shoes that Andy had removed from the shelters. Andy had never told Benny that was his name. He often wondered how he'd found it out. Andy would sometimes imagine that Benny was a deep undercover spy. Perhaps the shoes were dead letter drops. He did not even know what Benny's name was. Andy answered, "Oh, leave it out, mate. I'm off duty." That seemed to be enough for an answer for Benny, and he swayed off into the place that tramps go when they finish talking to you. The lingering smell of Benny prompted Andy to leave the bus shelter. He walked along the road and followed the hedge towards the house. Each step nearer the house, Andy's breath was getting heavier and heavier. You can see the colour draining from his face. By the time he's at the path of the house, he's looking like a twitching rodent waiting to be eaten by a hovering hawk. He stops a moment and then tugs at his backpack and pulls a box of chocolates out. You can hear the chocolate rattle and shake inside, and he takes a deep breath to steady his nerves. His nerves are steadied until he breathes out again. Then he's back to where he was. Somehow he managed to get the courage to walk up the path. For a moment, he stares at the doorbell, as if hoping that it will ring on its own. Inside the house, Jennifer was about to sit down and watch Holby City. She'd made herself a cup of tea after a particularly exciting episode of EastEnders. It appeared that Pat had a secret admirer. Jennifer was just thinking, why is that Pat getting all the attention when I'm not? She's heard something at first that she thought was the kettle relaxing. Then she heard it again. "Bloody kids! I'll get them this time," she mutters to herself. Then the doorbell coughs into action. She leaps up and puts the hall light on and opens the door just as Jennifer was leaping into action. Andy was dropping the box of chocolates, running and diving into a bush in sheer panic and fear. So when Jennifer opens the door, no one is there. So she steps out to have a look around and treads on the chocolates and shouts, "Would you kids just piss off?" She's sure she can hear some sniggering from the bushes. So she turns around and goes back indoors. "I won't give them the satisfaction of a reaction," she thinks. in the bush. Andy is trying to breathe as quietly as his nerves will let him. Once the door is shut, he whispers, "I love you." Andy shivers. He knows he has a long walk home. But at least he made progress this time.